I left Boise around 8 in the morning with everything I still owned in a Rubbermaid tub and a canvas duffel. The tub had clothes and a few books I hadn't sold yet. The duffel had my sleeping bag, a decent winter coat, and a box of granola bars I'd grabbed from the gas station on my way out. The temporary hire paper sat on the passenger seat in a manila folder that said National Park Service Seasonal Assignment across the tab. The pay was better than what I'd been making at the hardware store. Not amazing, but better. $1,300 every 2 weeks for basically sitting in a gatehouse and logging weather conditions. Maybe plowing if it got bad. Maybe not even that. Becky Silva, my new supervisor, had said on the phone that the road stayed closed most of the winter, and my job was just to be there in case someone needed assistance or tried to get through anyway. She made it sound boring, which was exactly what I wanted. I also wanted distance. Kelsey and I were still going back and forth with the divorce paperwork, and her lawyer kept calling my phone about the apartment deposit and who owed what for the furniture we'd split. I didn't have the energy to keep arguing about a couch we'd bought at IKEA 4 years ago. The gatehouse job ran until April. By then, maybe the whole thing would be sorted and I could figure out what came next. The drive south took most of the day. I crossed into Oregon a little after noon and stopped for gas and a sandwich in Klamath Falls. The guy at the counter asked if I was heading up to the lake, and when I said yeah, he just nodded and said to watch for ice on the highway past the junction. I thanked him and got back on the road. The landscape changed the farther I went. Flatter stretches gave way to hills and then actual mountains, all of them covered in snow and pine trees that looked black against the white. The highway climbed and the temperature dropped. I turned the heat up and kept the radio on some classic rock station that kept cutting in and out. By late afternoon, the light was starting to go soft and orange. I passed the turnoff for Diamond Lake and kept going another 2 miles until I saw the sign for the north entrance. The road narrowed and the plowed section ended pretty much right there. Snowdrifts covered everything past the chain barrier, which was exactly where Gatehouse 3 was supposed to be. I pulled over and sat there for a minute looking at it. The gatehouse was small. Smaller than I'd expected, honestly. It was maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, wood-sided and painted that standard Park Service brown with a green metal roof. One window faced the road and another faced the barrier. Snow was piled up against the north side almost to the roofline. The whole area felt empty. No other buildings, no other cars. Just the gatehouse, the chain, and the forest pressing in on both sides. I got out, and the cold hit me immediately. It wasn't windy, but the air had that sharp edge that gets into your lungs. I pulled on my coat and grabbed the folder and the key Becky had mailed me. My breath came out in clouds. The door was on the side facing the parking area. The lock was stiff, and I had to wiggle the key a little before it turned. The door opened inward, and I stepped inside. It smelled like propane and old wood and something faintly metallic. There was a single overhead light, and I found the switch by the door and flipped it. A bulb in a wire cage buzzed to life. Everything was already set up. A narrow cot with a thin mattress and a folded wool blanket sat against the left wall. A small propane heater stood in the corner, the kind with a pilot light and a metal grate. Next to it were 2 red canisters, both full. There was a wooden table under the front window with a folding chair tucked beneath it, and on the table sat a radio unit that looked older than me. It was bolted down, which seemed excessive until I figured they probably didn't want someone walking off with it. Shelves lined the back wall, stocked with canned soup, beans, chili, tuna, crackers, peanut butter, and a few boxes of pasta. There was also a camp stove, a dented kettle, a pot, a pan, and a couple of plates and bowls. A logbook sat on the edge of the table, spiral-bound and thick. The cover said, "Weather and Incident Log," in faded Sharpie. I set the folder down and looked around. It wasn't much, but it was warmer than outside, and it had everything I'd need. I went back to the truck and hauled in the tub and the duffel and set them by the cot. The heater had instructions taped to the side, so I lit the pilot, and adjusted the dial until I felt warm air starting to push out. The whole place heated up fast. I was pulling my sleeping bag out of the duffel when I heard tires on gravel outside. I stepped to the window and saw a white Park Service truck pulling up next to mine. The door opened and a woman got out, moving quick. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with dark hair pulled back tight and a uniform jacket zipped all the way up. She had a canvas bag over one shoulder and a clipboard in her hand. I opened the door before she knocked. "Frances Harris?" she said. "Yeah. Becky Silva. We talked on the phone." "Right." She didn't offer her hand. She just stepped past me into the gatehouse and set the clipboard on the table. She smelled like coffee and cold air. "You got here okay," she said. It wasn't really a question. "Yeah, no issues." She glanced around the room, checking things off in her head. Then she reached into the canvas bag and pulled out a ring of keys and a folded piece of paper. "These are for the barrier lock, the supply shed around back, and the equipment locker if you need tools," she said, setting the keys on the table. "This is the supply list. If you need anything, radio it in on Channel 4. Someone checks twice a day, 0800 and 1800. Don't use it for anything else unless it's an emergency." "Got it." She moved to the corner and crouched by the heater, checking the propane connection. Then she stood and pointed at a red valve on the wall near the shelves. "That's your shutoff if something goes wrong with the heater. Don't touch it unless you have to." She pointed at 2 emergency lanterns hanging on hooks by the door. "Battery powered. Test them once a week. There's extra batteries in the supply shed." I nodded. She was talking fast, like she had somewhere else to be. She checked the radio next, flipping a switch and turning a dial until static hissed out. She turned it back off and made a note on the clipboard. "Weather reports come through twice a day on Channel 2. You log temperature, wind speed, visibility, and snow depth in the book, every day, no exceptions." "Okay." She pulled a weather station unit from the bag and set it on the table. It had a small digital screen and a sensor cable that ran outside. She didn't explain it. I figured I'd work it out. Then she stopped and looked at me for the first time. Really looked at me. Her eyes were brown and tired. "You read the job description?" she asked. "Yeah." "You understand you're alone out here until April?" "Yeah." "No one's coming to check on you. You radio if you need something, but unless the road opens or there's an emergency, you're on your own." "I got it." She studied me for another second, then nodded. She reached into the bag one more time and pulled out a yellow envelope, the kind with the metal clasp. She set it on the table next to the logbook. "You need to read that before dark," she said. "It's standard procedure." I looked at the envelope. It wasn't labeled. "What is it?" "Instructions," she said. "Site-specific stuff. Read it tonight." She picked up the clipboard and the empty bag and moved toward the door. I stepped aside and she walked past me, then stopped on the threshold. "You have my number if something comes up," she said. "Yeah." She looked at me one more time, and I couldn't figure out what the look meant. Then she got in her truck, backed out, and drove off. The sound of the engine faded fast, and then it was just me and the wind and the hum of the propane heater. I stood in the doorway for a minute, watching the empty road. Then I went back inside and shut the door. The yellow envelope sat on the table where she'd left it. I didn't open it right away. I finished unpacking instead, setting my clothes on the shelf and my sleeping bag on the cot. I tested the camp stove and boiled water for coffee using the instant stuff I'd brought. The light outside was fading, turning the snow blue and the trees into dark shapes. When I finally sat down at the table, the envelope was right in front of me. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, like there were multiple pages inside. I undid the clasp and pulled out the papers. I opened the yellow envelope. The metal clasp made a small sound when I undid it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, photocopied. The kind where you can tell it's been copied from another copy because the text has that slightly fuzzy edge. and there's a shadow down one side like someone didn't press the original flat enough. The title sat at the top in all caps. Rules for Gatehouse 3. I read it twice. The first time I thought I was missing something. The second time I figured it had to be a prank. 5 rules total, numbered. Typed on what must have been an actual typewriter because some letters sat higher than others and the lowercase e was filled in with old ink. Rule 1. Lock the exterior shutter over the front window at sunset. Do not open it until full daylight. Rule 2. If headlights stop on the road after sunset and do not move, do not respond to contact attempts of any kind. Remain silent. They will leave. Rule 3. If you hear scraping beneath the floor, place a cup of hot coffee on the floor vent. Use the instant coffee in the back of the dry goods shelf. Rule 4. Never write a person's name in the logbook. Log incidents by description only. Rule 5. At exactly 2:13 a.m., read one full page aloud from any book. You may repeat the same page each night if preferred. That was it. No explanation, no signature. The bottom of the page had a smudged Park Service logo that looked about 30 years old. I set the paper down and stared at the heater for a minute. My first thought was Bodie. I didn't know a Bodie yet, but later I'd find out he worked seasonal jobs here too and had a reputation for this kind of thing. Weird initiation stuff. Trying to spook the new guy. My second thought was Becky. She'd handed me the envelope with a straight face and called it standard procedure. But her tone had been flat, controlled. The kind of voice you use when you're repeating something you've said a dozen times and stopped questioning. I picked the paper up again. The edges were worn soft. Not like it had been handled a lot. More like it had been sitting in a drawer somewhere for years. There were stains, too. Small brownish dots along the top right corner. Could have been coffee. Could have been anything. Then I noticed the marks. Tiny scratches. 4 of them. Parallel. Running along the left margin about halfway down. They didn't look accidental. They looked deliberate. Thin and precise. Almost like someone or something had dragged claws across the surface. I turned the paper over. Nothing on the back except a faint image of the text bleeding through. I set it down again and leaned back in the folding chair. The metal creaked. This was somebody messing with me. Had to be. I stood up and looked around the room, 12 by 12 feet. Not a lot of places to hide anything. I checked the window first, the one facing the road. Just glass and a basic latch. No camera, no wiring. I ran my hand along the frame anyway. Nothing. I moved to the cot, lifted the mattress, just plywood underneath and dust. Checked the blanket. Shook it out. Standard wool. Smelled like storage. The shelves next. I pulled cans forward, moved the boxes of pasta, found the instant coffee shoved way in the back behind 3 cans of chili. It was a plain glass jar with a red lid. The kind you'd buy at any grocery store. I pulled it out and held it up to the light. Just coffee. Looked normal. I put it back. The table had nothing under it. The radio was bolted down and didn't have any extra components I could see. I checked the battery lanterns on the hooks by the door. Just lanterns. Tested the switches. They worked. I got down on my hands and knees and checked the floor. That's when I found the vent. It sat near the back wall, maybe 10 inches square. Metal grate painted the same brown as the trim. I hadn't noticed it before because the light was dim and it blended in. I pressed my face close. Couldn't see anything below. Just darkness. I put my hand over it. No air movement. Not a heating vent then. I tried to lift the grate. It didn't budge. Screwed down. I sat back on my heels. The floor was solid. Plywood over what I assumed were beams. No basement, no crawl space. This was a gatehouse, a box on a foundation. There shouldn't be anything underneath except frozen ground. I stood up and brushed off my knees. Checked the walls next. Tapped along the boards. All solid. No hollow spots. No speakers. No camera lenses. I even checked inside the propane heater. Just the pilot light, and the burner, and the metal grate. Nothing. If this was a prank, it was committed. I'd give them that. I looked at the yellow envelope still sitting on the table, then at the window. The light outside had changed. That blue color was deepening, turning gray. The trees were almost black now. I walked to the door and stepped out. The cold hit immediately. I hadn't put my coat back on, and the air went right through my shirt. My breath came out in clouds. The sun was gone. Not set yet, but sinking behind the mountains. Maybe 10 minutes left. I walked around to the front of the gatehouse. There was a shutter, exterior, hinged at the top. I hadn't noticed it earlier because it was folded up flat against the wall above the window. There was a metal rod leaning beside the doorframe, hook on one end. I picked up the rod, reached up with the hook and caught the shutter's edge, pulled it down. It swung smooth, heavier than I expected. When it locked into place over the window, it covered the glass completely. There was a latch on each side. I flipped them both closed. The front of the gatehouse looked different with the shutter down. Blank, like a face with its eyes covered. I put the rod back and returned inside. The room felt smaller now. Only one window. The one facing the chain barrier. The one without a shutter. I sat down at the table and pulled the logbook over. Spiral bound, maybe 100 pages. The first dozen were filled in, different handwriting, dates going back to November, temperatures, wind conditions, snow depth, all the boring stuff Becky mentioned. I flipped through looking for anything strange. Nothing. Just weather, except none of the entries mentioned people. Even when someone noted a supply delivery, it just said, "Supplies received." No name, no signature. I turned to the first blank page. The pencil sat next to the logbook. Regular number 2. I picked it up. Wrote the date. January 7th. Wrote the time. 1800 hours. I didn't usually think in military time, but it felt right for this. I looked at the weather station unit Becky had left. Hadn't set it up yet. I wrote down what I could see through the side window instead. Temperature maybe 20 degrees. No wind. Visibility clear. Snow depth approximately 3 feet based on the drifts against the building. I didn't write Becky's name. Didn't write my own. Just, supervisor departed, gatehouse secure, shutter locked. I set the pencil down, sat there. The heater ticked. The overhead light buzzed. Outside the window, the last of the daylight faded and the snow turned gray and then disappeared into darkness. I'd taken this job because I needed distance. From Boise, from Kelsey's lawyer, from the apartment that wasn't mine anymore and the couch we'd bought together and the whole shape of a life that had stopped fitting. The job listing said, isolated. It said, minimal contact. It said exactly what I wanted. But sitting there in that small room with the rules on the table and the shutter locked and nothing but static and darkness outside, it didn't feel like a job anymore. It felt like something else. A test, maybe. The kind where nobody tells you what you're supposed to learn or whether you're passing or what happens if you fail. I picked up the photocopied page again, read Rule 5 one more time. 2:13 a.m. I checked my watch. 6:23 p.m. 8 hours to go. I folded the paper and slid it back into the yellow envelope, put the envelope in my duffel. I wasn't leaving it out where I'd keep looking at it. Then I pulled one of the books from my Rubbermaid tub, old paperback. Mystery novel I'd read twice already, stuck it on the shelf next to the canned soup. Just in case. The road stayed quiet. I mean completely quiet. No engine sounds, no distant hum of traffic, nothing. Just the heater ticking in the corner and the overhead bulb buzzing every few seconds. I tried reading the mystery novel I'd set aside, but couldn't focus on the words. Kept reading the same paragraph about a detective finding a body in a parking garage. Finally gave up around 9 and made myself another cup of instant coffee just to have something to do. The side window showed nothing but darkness and the faint outline of snow reflecting what little light came from inside. I turned off the overhead bulb around 8:30 because it felt too bright, too exposed. Used one of the battery lanterns instead. Softer. Made the room feel smaller, but in a way that didn't bug me. I checked my watch. 9:42. The rules were still in the duffel. I hadn't looked at them again, but I knew what they said. Lock the shutter at sunset. Done. Ignore headlights after dark. Sure. Coffee on the vent if scraping happens. Instant coffee from the back of the shelf, which I'd already located. No names in the logbook. Fine. Read aloud at 2:13 a.m. The novel was ready. Probably still a prank. That's what I figured. Becky or Bodie or whoever set this up was waiting to see if I'd actually follow through. Maybe there was a camera I'd missed. Maybe someone would show up tomorrow morning laughing about the whole thing. But I'd locked the shutter anyway, and I'd written the logbook entry without names. And the coffee jar was sitting on the counter next to the camp stove where I'd moved it earlier. Just in case. 9:58. I poured myself more coffee. Didn't really want it, but my hands needed something to hold. The mug was chipped white ceramic, Park Service logo faded on one side. I sat at the table facing the side window and waited. 10:07 when I saw them, headlights coming up the grade, slow and steady, climbing the road from the south. I stood up, moved to the side window, watched the beams cut through the darkness between the trees. The light got brighter as the vehicle climbed. I could hear the engine now. Low rumble, steady pace. Not fast, not hesitant either. Just constant forward motion. The headlights reached the chain barrier and stopped. I stepped back from the window. My heart kicked up, but I kept my breathing even. Probably someone lost. Probably a ranger doing a check. Probably nothing. Except the rules said, ignore headlights after dark. I moved to the front wall, stood to the side of where the shutter covered the window. There was a gap between the shutter and the door frame, maybe half an inch. I leaned close and looked through. 2 headlights, white beams hitting the chain barrier and the snow beyond. The vehicle sat maybe 30 feet from the gatehouse. I couldn't make out the shape behind the lights. Truck, probably. Could have been a sedan. Hard to tell with the glare. The beams didn't move. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. The engine kept running. I could hear it through the walls. That low, steady idle. The driver wasn't getting out, wasn't honking, wasn't doing anything. Just sitting there with the lights on, pointed straight at the barrier. I stepped back from the gap. My coffee mug was still on the table. I picked it up, took a sip. Cold already. I set it down and checked my watch. 10:12. The radio clicked on. I didn't touch it. I was standing 6 feet away. But the speaker crackled and the static filled the room, and then a voice came through. "Gatehouse 3, this is Silva. Come in." Becky's voice. Calm and clipped and authoritative. Same tone she'd used that afternoon when she handed me the keys. I stared at the radio. The dial was still set to channel 2 where she'd left it during her inspection. "Gatehouse 3, this is Silva. I have a medical emergency. Open the barrier. Confirm." The cadence was right. The words were right. But something about the rhythm felt off. Too smooth. Too practiced. Like someone reading lines they'd memorized. Badge 7724. Code word Juniper. Open the barrier, Harris. My badge number, the code word from the paperwork Becky had made me repeat during the briefing. All correct. I reached for the radio. My hand hovered over the power switch. The voice came again. "Harris, medical emergency. Open the barrier now." Still Becky's voice. Still that calm, professional tone. But the pauses between sentences were identical. exactly the same length, like a recording. I switched the radio off. The speaker went silent. The headlights outside didn't move. I stepped away from the table, moved to the back wall near the shelves, put distance between myself and the windows. Both of them. The shutter covered the front, but the side window was still exposed, and I didn't want to be visible if someone looked. My chest felt tight. I made myself breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, counted to 4 each way. The engine kept idling outside. That same steady rumble. I stayed against the back wall, checked my watch, 10:14. I'd give it time, see what happened. The rules said ignore headlights after dark, and that's what I was doing. Ignoring them. Except my pulse was hammering and my hands felt cold and I couldn't stop listening to that engine. Minutes crawled. I didn't move. Didn't go near the windows. The lantern on the table cast long shadows across the floor. The heater ticked. The propane smell mixed with old wood and instant coffee. 10:18. 10:21. The headlights stayed put. I could see the faint glow through the gap around the shutter. White light leaking into the room at the edges. My legs started to ache from standing still. I shifted my weight, rolled my shoulders, kept my eyes on the shutter. 10:26. The engine sound changed, revved slightly. Then I heard tires on gravel. I moved to the gap beside the shutter, looked through. The headlights were moving, but not forward, backward. The vehicle was reversing down the road, slow and controlled. The beams swung across the trees as it backed down the grade. I watched until the lights disappeared below the hill. The engine sound faded, then gone. The road went quiet again. I stayed at the gap for another minute, 2 minutes. Nothing came back. I finally stepped away, went to the table, sat down hard in the folding chair. My coffee mug was right where I'd left it. I picked it up, still cold. I drank it anyway. 10:32. My hands were shaking a little. I set the mug down and pressed my palms flat against the table. The wood was smooth and cold. Real, solid. Becky's voice on the radio. My badge number. The code word. All correct. But that cadence, those identical pauses. I pulled the logbook toward me, flipped to the page where I'd written the evening entry, picked up the pen. 22:32 hours. Vehicle arrived at barrier. Departed after 15 minutes. No contact made. No names. Just description. I closed the logbook. Put the pen down. The heater ticked. The lantern flickered slightly. I sat there and tried to think about nothing. Tried to let my pulse settle. Didn't really work, but I went through the motions anyway. I should have felt tired. It had been a long day. Boise too here, all that driving. Becky's inspection, the rules, the headlights. But my brain wouldn't settle. Too wired. Too aware of every sound. I made another cup of coffee around 11. Ate a granola bar from the box in my duffel. Walked to the side window and looked out at nothing. Just darkness and snow. 11:40, midnight, 12:15. I'd moved back to the table. Had the mystery novel open but wasn't reading it, just staring at the page. 12:28. That's when I heard it, scraping, under the floor, slow and steady, like something being dragged over packed dirt. The sound came from somewhere beneath the back wall, near where I'd found that metal vent grate. I froze, listened. The scraping continued, not loud, not frantic, just constant, rhythmic, something moving under the gatehouse. I thought about the foundation, the way the building sat on the ground, no basement, no crawl space, just a box on dirt. Except something was down there. The scraping moved, shifted toward the center of the floor. I could track it by sound. Whatever it was dragging itself along. Slow progress, deliberate. My throat went dry. The rules. Third one. Place hot coffee on the floor vent if scraping is heard beneath the floor. Instant coffee from the back of the shelf. I stood up. My legs felt stiff. I went to the counter where I'd left the red-lidded jar, unscrewed the top. The crystals inside looked brown and old, smelled burnt. I filled the dented kettle from the water jug, lit the camp stove. Blue flame hissed to life. The scraping continued under the floor. Steady, patient. The kettle took forever. I stood there watching the flame, listening to that sound underneath me. Something dragging itself through the dark. Getting closer to the vent maybe, or just circling. I couldn't tell. Finally, the kettle started to hiss. I poured the hot water into the chipped mug, spooned in the instant coffee from the back of the shelf. 3 heaping spoonfuls, stirred it with the handle of a fork because I couldn't find a spoon. The coffee looked thick, almost black. Steam rose from the surface. I carried the mug to the back wall, knelt down by the vent grate. The scraping was louder here, right underneath, maybe 2 feet down, maybe less. I set the mug on the vent grate. The scraping stopped. Just stopped, completely. No fade out, no gradual silence. 1 second it was there, and the next it wasn't. I stayed kneeling, stared at the mug sitting on the metal grate. The steam curled up in thin wisps. The overhead lantern cast my shadow across the floor. Nothing moved under there. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Silence. I stood up slowly, backed away from the vent. My knees cracked. I returned to the table and sat down. The mug stayed on the vent. The coffee cooled. The gatehouse ticked and hummed around me. I checked my watch. 12:33 a.m. I stood by the table and watched the coffee mug on the vent grate. Steam rose in a thin line that bent near the ceiling. The scraping had stopped the second I set the cup down, and now the room felt too quiet. Just the propane heater ticking and that low hum from the lantern on the table. I waited, probably 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Then 2 taps came from below the grate. Sharp, deliberate, metal on metal, or something hard hitting the underside of the vent. Tap, tap. I didn't move. The taps weren't random. They were spaced evenly, like someone knocking on a door to say they heard you, that they were there. A smell rose through the grate right after. Wet metal. That specific scent you get when you handle old tools in the rain or touch a chain-link fence after a storm. Cold and sharp and a little bit like blood if you think about it too long. I took a step back without meaning to. My shoulder hit the edge of the shelf, and a can of soup shifted but didn't fall. The smell faded after maybe 10 seconds. The coffee mug sat there steaming, and nothing else happened. No more scraping, no more taps. Just silence and the heater, and the faint buzz of the lantern. I felt like I'd just received an answer. That was the only way to describe it. Not a threat, not a warning. Just acknowledgement. Like I'd done what I was supposed to do, and something down there knew it. I went back to the table and sat down. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. I checked my watch. 12:37. I had an hour and 36 minutes until 2:13. The mystery novel sat open where I'd left it. I tried reading again, but the words didn't stick. I kept glancing at the vent grate and the coffee mug. The steam had thinned out. After a while, I couldn't see it anymore, but the mug was still there, untouched. I made another cup of regular coffee from the canister on the counter, not the burnt stuff from the back shelf. I used the chipped Park Service mug and drank it slow. It was too hot and tasted like propane, but I didn't care. The minutes dragged. I got up twice to check the side window. The road was empty both times. Just snow and darkness and the chain barrier down at the end of the plowed section. At 1:40, I pulled the paperback from my duffel. Not the mystery novel. A different one. some thriller I'd bought at a used bookstore in Boise 2 years ago and never finished. I didn't remember the plot, didn't matter. I just needed a page. I set it on the table next to the logbook and kept checking my watch. 1:53, 2:04, 2:10. At 2:12, I stood up and opened the book to a random page. Chapter 6. The protagonist was in a parking garage looking for someone. I didn't read ahead, just waited. 2:13. I started reading aloud. My voice sounded flat in the small room. Derek moved between the rows of cars with his hand on the grip of his service weapon. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered twice, casting shadows that stretched and shrank across the oil-stained concrete. I kept going. My voice steadied. I read slower than I normally would, pronouncing each word clearly. The page was dense, small font, probably 300 words. He'd gotten the call 20 minutes earlier. Anonymous tip. A witness claimed to have seen the suspect's vehicle entering the structure at 10:15 p.m. Derek didn't trust anonymous tips, but he didn't ignore them either. Not in this case. Not with 3 bodies already and the department breathing down his neck. The heater ticked while I read. I noticed it after the first paragraph. The ticks matched my pacing. When I paused at a period, the heater ticked. When I kept going, it ticked again at the next pause. I didn't stop reading. The garage was nearly empty. A few sedans on the lower levels. A truck near the stairwell. Nothing that matched the description. Derek reached the far corner and turned back, scanning the shadows between support columns. The building creaked. Not a settling sound. A deliberate creak that started at the front wall and moved along the right side toward the back, like the structure was adjusting itself, listening. I kept my eyes on the page. My voice didn't waver. That's when he saw it. A dark sedan parked in the shadow of the ramp to the upper level. No plates. Windows tinted. Engine cold. Derek approached from the side, weapon drawn, and reached for the door handle. The air pressure in the room changed. I felt it in my ears. A subtle release, like when you drive down from a mountain pass and everything equalizes. The tightness I'd been carrying in my chest since the headlights appeared earlier eased. I finished the page. He pulled the door open. The interior was empty. No driver, no passenger. Just a cell phone on the dashboard, screen lit, showing a single text message. "You're late." I closed the book. The heater stopped ticking. The room stopped creaking. Everything went quiet except for the low hum of the lantern. I set the book on the table and sat down. My hands weren't shaking. I felt tired, drained maybe, like I'd just finished a long shift doing physical work. I checked my watch. 2:17. I didn't write anything in the logbook. Didn't seem necessary. I'd followed the rules. That was it. I turned off the lantern and lay down on the cot without taking off my boots. The wool blanket smelled like dust and old canvas. I pulled it up to my chest and closed my eyes. I didn't think I'd sleep, but I did. I woke up to gray light coming through the side window. My watch said 6:42. The heater was still running. The coffee mug was still on the vent grate, empty now, completely dry. I sat up and rubbed my face. My neck was stiff from the thin mattress and I needed to piss. I stepped outside into the cold. The sky was that pale, early morning color, not quite blue yet. I walked around to the side of the building and took care of business, then went back inside and washed my hands with water from the jug and a paper towel. I unlatched the front shutter first, used the hooked rod to push it back up and fold it flat against the wall above the window. The road beyond the chain barrier was empty. No tire tracks, no footprints, just smooth snow and the 2-lane highway disappearing into the trees. I stood there for a minute looking at the spot where the headlights had been. Nothing. Not a soul around. I went back inside and retrieved the radio from the table, switched it on and tuned to channel 4. Becky had said 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. for supply requests, but she'd also said emergencies any time. I figured a trespasser vehicle counted. I pressed the talk button. "This is Gatehouse 3, calling Silva." "Over." Static for about 10 seconds. Then her voice came through, clear and clipped. "Silva, go ahead." "Had a vehicle at the barrier last night," I said. "Around 2200 hours, stayed about 15 minutes, then left. Thought you should know." Pause. Then, "Did it cross the barrier?" "No, just stopped and idled. Then reversed back down the grade." Another pause, longer this time. "Road cameras have been out for a week. Snowcats haven't been near your station. You sure about the time?" "Yeah, logged it." "All right." Her tone didn't change. Flat, professional. Then, "Did you write any names in the logbook?" I frowned. "No." "Good. Keep it that way." The radio clicked off. I stood there holding the handset for a second, then switched the unit off and set it back on the table. That was it. No follow-up. No questions about the vehicle description or whether I got a plate number. Just confirmation that the cameras were down and a reminder about the names. I looked at the logbook. My entry from last night was still there. 22:32 hours. Vehicle arrived at barrier. Departed after 15 minutes. No contact made. No names. Just like she said. I set the radio down and went to make coffee. I set the radio down and made coffee first. Real coffee from the counter canister. Not the burnt stuff from the back shelf. That was only for the vent. The mug on the grate was still empty, still dry. I didn't touch it. I drank standing up, looking out the side window at the chain barrier and the road beyond. Silva said the snowcats hadn't been up here. Said the cameras were out. Didn't ask for a description. Didn't ask for a plate number. Just asked if I wrote any names. I finished the coffee and pulled on my parka. Grabbed the keys off the table. Went outside. The cold hit me the same way it always did. Sharp and immediate. The kind that made your lungs tighten on the first breath. I zipped the parka all the way up and walked around to the front of the gatehouse where the chain barrier stretched across the road. The snow beyond the barrier was smooth, completely undisturbed. No tire tracks, no ruts. Nothing to show a vehicle had stopped there at all. I stood there for probably a full minute just staring at the snow. The vehicle had been real. I'd heard the engine, seen the headlights through the gap in the shutter. The radio had clicked on by itself. Silva's voice had come through with the right badge number and the right code word. But there were no tire tracks. I walked closer to the barrier, boots crunching through the packed snow on my side, looked left and right along the road. Still nothing. Just smooth, white snow covering the entire width of the pavement, like nothing had driven up here in days. That's when I saw the footprints. They started about 10 feet past the barrier, just appeared in the middle of the road. No trail leading up to them. They were there, pressed deep into the snow, heading straight toward the gatehouse. I stopped walking. The prints were bare feet. No boot treads, no shoe patterns, just the shape of feet. Toes clearly visible, heels. The arch, like someone had walked out here in the middle of winter with nothing on. The prints were bigger than mine, longer, wider at the toes. I followed them with my eyes. They came straight across the road, right up to the chain barrier, then kept going. Didn't go around. Didn't stop. Just continued in a straight line through the barrier and across the parking area. Straight to the side window. I turned and walked along the prints. They were evenly spaced, a normal walking stride. The snow around them was undisturbed, no drag marks, no scuff marks. Just clean footprints pressed down into the snow. They stopped directly beneath the side window. The snow there had been scraped clean, an oval shape, roughly the size of a dinner plate, right where the prints ended. The ground underneath was visible. Frozen dirt and a few dead pine needles. The scraped area was smooth, deliberate. I looked up at the window. It was about 5 feet off the ground. Someone standing here would have been at the right height to press their face against the glass, or their hands, or both. I'd been standing at that window twice last night, once around 1:40, once just after 2. The oval was centered perfectly beneath the window, not off to one side, not smudged or messy, just a clean circle of scraped snow where someone had stood and leaned forward. I crouched down next to it. The footprints ended right at the edge of the oval. No prints leading away, just the ones coming toward the window, then nothing. The air smelled like pine and cold. Nothing else. No lingering scent. No indication anyone had been here at all except for the prints and the scraped snow. I stood up and looked back toward the road. The prints came from the barrier in a straight line. Before that, they just appeared in the middle of the pavement, like someone had started walking from nowhere. I went back inside, locked the door, sat at the table. My hands were shaking a little, not much, just enough to notice. I opened the logbook and looked at my entry from last night. 22:32 hours. Vehicle arrived at barrier. Departed after 15 minutes. No contact made. I didn't write anything about the footprints. The morning passed slowly. I ate a can of chili heated on the camp stove, made more coffee, tested the battery lanterns because I couldn't remember if I'd done it this week. Both worked fine. Around noon, I heard an engine coming up the road, louder than the vehicle from last night, heavier. I went to the side window and saw a yellow plow truck climbing the grade. It had a curved orange blade mounted on the front and a salt spreader on the back, Park Service logo on the door. The truck slowed as it approached the barrier, then swung wide into the parking area beside my pickup. The engine cut off and the door opened. The driver was tall, maybe 6'1", stocky build, broad shoulders, graying sandy hair under a Park Service cap. He wore a high-vis jacket over insulated bibs and heavy gloves. He saw me at the window and raised one hand. Not a wave, just an acknowledgement. I opened the door. "Hey," he said. He had an easy voice, relaxed. "Just turning around. Road's clear down to the junction." "All right," I said. He walked closer, pulling off his gloves. "You're the new guy. Harris, right?" I didn't answer immediately. He noticed. "Relax," he said. "I'm not writing it down. Bodhi Soto. I run the plow routes up here during the season." "Francis," I said. He nodded, leaned against the side of my truck. "How's the gatehouse treating you?" "Fine." "Cold enough?" "It's fine." Bodhi grinned. "Yeah. It's not the cold that gets to people." I didn't say anything. He looked past me toward the gatehouse, then back at the road. "You know the history of this place?" "No." "Used to be a toll booth," he said. "Back in the 30s, before it was a park. Private road up to the rim. They charged $2 a car." I waited. There was a cashier working one winter. 1938, I think. Big blizzard came through. Snowed for 3 days straight. When it cleared, the cashier was gone. Just gone. Door was locked from the inside. No tracks in the snow. Nothing. Bodhi pulled a thermos from his jacket and unscrewed the cap. Poured coffee into the lid. Spring came, crews started doing maintenance. Pulled up the floor to check the foundation. He took a sip. Found the cashier underneath. Body was still intact, frozen solid. The logbook was down there too, open beside him. I felt something tighten in my chest. After that, Bodhi said, winter staff started noticing things. The cashier's name kept showing up in the records, written in different hands, different ink. Always the same name, and then people started seeing him at the door. "Seeing him," I said. "Knocking," Bodhi said. "Standing outside, asking to come in." Winter staff stopped writing names after that, just descriptions, weather, vehicle colors, times, no names. He finished the coffee and screwed the cap back on. "Worked, mostly. Some winters are quiet, some aren't." "Silva didn't mention any of this," I said. She wouldn't, Bodie said. Park Service doesn't put ghost stories in the job description. Bad for hiring. He pushed off my truck and walked back toward the plow. Stopped halfway and turned around. You get the rules, right? The yellow envelope? Yeah. Follow them, he said. They're not suggestions. I have been. Good. He opened the truck door, then paused. You have any trouble, Radio Silva? Or me, if you catch me on the route. Channel 4. All right. He climbed in and started the engine, backed up carefully, turned the plow around, and headed back down the road. The engine noise faded after about a minute. I went back inside. The logbook was still on the table where I'd left it. I sat down and flipped back through the older entries. November, December, early January. Different handwriting, different pens, blue ink, black ink, pencil on a few pages. Temperature 14 degrees, wind moderate, visibility poor, snow depth 4 feet. Temperature 9 degrees, no wind, visibility clear, snow depth 4 feet 2 inches. Supplies received, propane replaced. Vehicle northbound, red truck, turned back at barrier. No names, not one. Just descriptions, facts, times. I kept flipping. The entries went back further. October, September. The handwriting changed. More people, more seasons, all of them following the same pattern. I reached the last page with writing on it. The entry was dated December 23rd. Temperature, wind, visibility, snow depth, all normal. Below that, someone had written one word in thick black ink, right. That was it. Just the word, centered on the page. The ink was heavier than the rest of the entries, deliberate. The letters were neat, careful. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the logbook and pushed it to the center of the table. I sat at the table after Bodie left. The plow sound faded down the hill. The parking area went quiet again. I kept thinking about what Bodie said, the cashier who disappeared, the body under the floor, the name showing up in different handwriting. That word scratched into the margin, right. I pulled the yellow envelope from my duffel and took out the photocopied rules. The claw marks ran down the left side, 4 parallel lines. And that word at the bottom of the 4th scratch, right. I figured it was hazing. Probably every guy who'd worked here got the same treatment. The mysterious rules, the creepy story about the dead cashier, the word scratched in the margin to freak you out, make you think something was waiting for you to slip up. Standard seasonal worker stuff, mess with the new guy. I looked at the logbook on the table, spiral bound. Weather and incident log written in faded Sharpie on the cover. I flipped it open to the filled pages. Different handwriting, dates going back to November, temperatures, wind conditions, snow depth. Supply deliveries noted without names. Just supplies received and a time. No names anywhere. I turned to my entry from last night, January 7th, 1800 hours, temperature, visibility, snow depth. Supervisor departed, gatehouse secure, shutter locked. I'd followed the rule without even thinking about it. Didn't write Becky's name, didn't write mine. But that was just being careful, playing it safe until I figured out what kind of place this was. I sat back in the folding chair. The heater ticked in the corner. The overhead light buzzed. The rules were theater. A test to see if I'd buy into the whole haunted gatehouse routine. If I'd sit here all winter following instructions like some scared kid afraid of the dark. I wasn't scared. I was just tired of people telling me what to do. Kelsey's lawyer calling 3 times a week about the apartment deposit. Becky handing me rules in a yellow envelope with that flat expression. Bodie dropping ghost stories and walking away with a warning. I picked up the pen from beside the logbook. I turned to today's page. January 8th. I'd already written the morning weather around 7. Temperature 19 degrees. No wind. Visibility clear. I clicked the pen. I wrote Supervisor B. Silva on the next line. Then I stopped and looked at it. That wasn't enough. That was still playing by their rules. abbreviating, being careful. I scratched out the B and wrote the full name. Becky Silva. The moment I lifted the pen, the heater shut off. Not a sputter, not a fade, just off. The ticking stopped. The warmth stopped flowing from the grate. The overhead light flickered once, a quick, dim, bright dim that left a ghost image in my vision. I set the pen down. Under the floor, something moved. Not the slow scraping from last night. This was fast. Multiple sounds overlapping, like bodies scrambling over each other, moving towards something, a ladder or access point. The sounds came from the back wall and rushed forward under the center of the room. Hands and knees on packed dirt, maybe elbows, maybe something else. I pushed back from the table. The chair legs scraped loud. The movement stopped directly under the vent grate. I looked at the coffee mug still sitting there, empty and dry from last night. The propane smell from the heater faded. The room started getting colder. I grabbed the pen again and tried to scratch out the name. Drew lines through Becky Silva. Black ink over black ink. But when I pulled the pen away, the letters were still visible underneath. Darker now. The ink looked wet and glossy, like it had soaked deeper into the paper instead of being covered up. I tried again, scribbled harder. The pen tore through the top layer of paper. The name stayed visible, shiny and dark. The radio snapped on. I hadn't touched it. I was 6 feet away at the table. Static came through the speaker. Then a voice. Kelsey. Francis, I'm on the road. I need help. Her voice, exact pitch. The way she said my name with the stress on the first syllable. I'm hurt. I can't get the car to start. Francis, please. I stared at the radio. Channel 2. The dial I'd left it on after last night. Outside, light bloomed against the front shutter. Headlights, bright white through the cracks around the edges, through the half-inch gap by the door frame. It was full daylight, maybe 1 in the afternoon. Sun still up, sky clear, but headlights pressed against the shutter from inches away, like a vehicle had appeared right outside the window. No engine sound, no tires on gravel, just light. Francis, I'm right outside. Can you open the barrier? Kelsey's voice again. Calm now. Too calm. I looked at the logbook, at Becky's name still visible under my scribbles, dark and glossy. The name rule wasn't a superstition. It was an invitation. I'd written a name and something answered. I stopped trying to erase it. Set the pen down, moved away from the table. I picked up the logbook and carried it to the counter by the camp stove. Away from the vent, away from the table and the radio and the front wall where the headlights pressed against the shutter. The radio kept going. I know you're in there. I saw you at the window. That wasn't Kelsey. Kelsey was in Boise. Kelsey didn't know where I was. Kelsey's lawyer had my phone number, but I'd stopped answering 2 weeks ago. Just open the door, Francis. It's cold out here. I didn't answer, didn't touch the radio. The headlights stayed on, bright white against the shutter. Shadows of the latch mechanism visible as dark lines across the wood. I checked my watch, 1:18 p.m. The shutter stayed locked. I wasn't opening it until sunset like the rules said, and I wasn't opening it after sunset either. I sat on the cot against the left wall, away from the windows. The radio kept transmitting static and silence, and then Kelsey's voice again, softer now, asking me to please just talk to her. I didn't move. The headlights stayed on until 3:47. Then they faded. No engine sound, no tires, just gone. The radio went quiet. Under the floor, nothing moved. I stayed on the cot until the sky started turning gray. The heater was still off. The room was cold enough I could see my breath. I got up and checked the pilot light, still lit. I turned the dial. The burner clicked and caught, and warmth started flowing again. I made coffee. ate crackers and peanut butter. Didn't write anything else in the logbook. At 5:53, the sun dropped behind the mountains. I went outside with the hooked rod and pulled down the shutter, latched both sides, came back in and locked the door. Full dark came fast. At 7:32, headlights appeared on the road. I watched from the side window. They climbed the grade slow and steady, closer than last night. They reached the barrier and kept coming, stopped maybe 15 feet from the gatehouse, closer than the night before. The engine idled. I couldn't see the vehicle shape, just two white beams cutting through the dark. At 7:40, someone tested the door handle. Slow. A quarter turn. Stop. Wait. Another quarter turn. Stop. Like they were listening for the latch, feeling for the mechanism. I stood against the back wall. Didn't move. Didn't make a sound. The handle turned again. Stopped. Turned back. Stopped. The radio clicked on. I looked at it from across the room. The dial was still on channel 2. "Francis, it's Becky. I need you to unlock the barrier. We've got an injured hiker." Her voice, flat and procedural like this morning. "Badge 7724, code word Juniper. Unlock the barrier and open the gate." The door handle turned again. Slow quarter turn. Stop. Wait. I didn't touch the radio. Didn't go near the door. "Francis, this is a direct order. Open the barrier now." The handle stopped moving. Silence. The headlights stayed on, bright against the shutter. I could see the glow through the side window too, spilling across the snow. I stayed against the back wall. At 9:15, the headlights cut out. No engine sound. No reverse beep. Just dark. I waited another 20 minutes. Then I crossed to the side window and looked out. The road was empty, snow undisturbed. Chain barrier dark against the white. I checked the door. Still locked. Handle in normal position. I sat at the table, pulled the logbook over from the counter, opened it to today's page. Becky's name was still there, dark and shiny under my scribble marks. I didn't try to erase it again. I wrote, 19:32 hours, vehicle at barrier, tested door, departed 21:15 hours, no contact made. I closed the logbook, the heater ticked, the overhead light buzzed. I had 6 hours and 58 minutes until 2:13. I stayed on the cot until the sky went gray, then black. The heater had kicked back on around 4 p.m. Just started running again like nothing happened. I didn't touch it. I got up once to eat a can of soup straight from the pot, standing at the counter with the logbook still sitting there, Becky's name visible under the scribbles. I didn't look at it for long. The evening passed slow. I kept the lantern on instead of the overhead light. Didn't want the buzzing. I sat at the table and tried reading the mystery novel, but I kept checking the side window. The road stayed empty. No headlights, no tire tracks, just the chain barrier and snow turning blue in the last light. At 8 p.m., I opened the shutter like I was supposed to. Used the hooked rod, same as before. The metal was cold even through my gloves. The road beyond was dark and still. I made coffee around 9, real coffee from the counter canister. The burnt instant jar stayed on the shelf. I didn't need it yet. The hours dragged. I sat, I stood. I walked to the window. I sat again. At 12:30 a.m., the scraping started, louder than the first night. Not the slow drag I'd heard before. This was faster, more deliberate. It started at the back wall under the vent grate and moved forward in short bursts, scraping and pausing, scraping and pausing. It sounded like something pulling itself across packed dirt, something with weight. I got up and went to the counter. My hands were shaking a little. I tried to steady them. I filled the kettle from the water jug, lit the camp stove, and waited for the water to heat. The scraping continued. It moved under the center of the room now, right beneath the table. The kettle started to whistle. I pulled it off the burner and grabbed the red-lidded jar from the back of the shelf. My hands were shaking worse now. I unscrewed the lid, scooped 3 spoonfuls into the chipped mug, poured the water. The burnt smell rose up sharp and bitter. I stirred it with the fork handle too fast, coffee sloshing over the rim onto my fingers. Hot. I didn't care. I carried the mug toward the vent grate at the back wall. The scraping was loud now, right under my feet. I took another step. My boot caught the edge of the table leg. My hand jerked. The mug slipped. It hit the floor and shattered. White ceramic pieces scattered across the wood. Hot coffee splashed everywhere, most of it going straight through the vent grate in a dark, steaming stream. The scraping didn't stop. I stood there holding nothing, staring at the broken pieces and the empty grate. The coffee kept dripping through the slats, but the sound underneath didn't change. It kept moving, scraping, pulling. Then I heard it at the door, not knocking, pushing. I turned. The door was bowing inward, just a little, maybe half an inch at the center. The wood creaked. The bow flexed back, then pushed in again, slow, steady. I looked at the front wall. The shutter bolts were flexing. I could see it from where I stood, the metal brackets bending slightly with each push from outside, then settling, then bending again. Something was out there. Something was under the floor. And I'd written Becky's name in the logbook. I thought about Bodie's story, the cashier who disappeared, the body found under the floor in spring, the logbook open beside him. Open. That's what he'd said. The logbook was open. I looked at the counter where I'd moved it earlier. The logbook sat there, spine up, pages visible. I'd left it open to today's date, January 8th, the page where I wrote Becky's name. The written name was an open page, an invitation. I crossed to the counter in 2 steps, grabbed the logbook, and flipped it shut. The scraping under the floor got louder, faster. The door bowed in again, deeper this time, and I heard the wood groan. Closing the book wasn't enough. I opened it to January 8th and stared at Becky's name, still visible under my scribbles, dark and glossy, the ink looking wet even though it had been hours. I tore the page out. It ripped clean along the spiral binding. I folded it once, then again, creasing it tight. My hands were still shaking. I carried the folded sheet to the camp stove and twisted the knob. The burner clicked and caught, blue flame spreading across the grate. I held the paper over the flame. It smoked. Gray wisps curled up from the edges where the heat touched. The paper turned brown, then black at the corners, but it didn't catch. I held it lower, right against the flame. More smoke. The paper curled and darkened, but no fire. Just smoke and that smell. Burnt coffee and something else. Something sharp and wrong. The door bowed in again. Harder. The hinges creaked. One of the shutter bolts popped loose and clattered to the floor outside. The scraping under the floor changed. Not scraping anymore. Climbing. I could hear it. Hands or something else gripping, pulling, dragging upward against wood or metal. The sound came from under the back wall now, moving up toward the floor, toward the room. I looked at the clock on the radio. 12:51 a.m., 22 minutes until 2:13. I kept the folded paper over the flame. It smoked and curled but wouldn't burn. I pulled it back, checked it. The ink was still there. Becky's name, visible through the char. The climbing sounds got louder, closer. I sat down at the table. I kept the camp stove lit. I set the folded paper on the table beside the mystery novel and the thriller I'd read from last night. I checked the clock again. 12:54. The door bowed. The climbing continued. I didn't move. 1 a.m. came and went. The sounds didn't stop. The hinges groaned. Another shutter bolt popped. I heard it hit the ground outside. 1:30. The climbing was right below me now, under the floorboards near the vent. I could hear the scraping of fingers or nails against wood grain, slow and deliberate, testing. 2 a.m. I picked up the thriller and opened it to a random page. Chapter 9. The protagonist in a stairwell, following someone. 2:10. I folded the paper tighter. I held it in my left hand and kept the book open with my right. 2:12. The door bowed so far inward I thought the latch would break. 2:13. I started reading aloud. My voice came out flat and shaky. I read slow, one word at a time. The protagonist climbed the stairwell, heard footsteps above, saw a shadow on the landing. The heater casing started ticking. Same rhythm as before, matching my pauses. I kept reading. The protagonist reached the landing, opened the door, saw an empty hallway. The building creaked, settling from the front wall to the back in a slow, deliberate wave. I held the folded paper over the camp stove flame while I read. The paper smoked again, curling and blackening. The protagonist walked down the hallway, checked each door, found them all locked. The heater ticked. The building creaked. The air pressure changed in my ears. The paper caught fire. It happened fast. 1 second smoking, the next burning bright orange, flame eating through the folds. I held it as long as I could, felt the heat on my fingers, then dropped it on the stove grate. It burned to ash in seconds. Black flakes curling up, then collapsing into nothing. I kept reading. The protagonist found the last door unlocked, pushed it open. Saw. The movement under the floor dropped away. Just gone. No scraping, no climbing, no sound at all. The silence was immediate and total. I finished the sentence. The protagonist saw an empty room with an open window. I closed the book. The heater stopped ticking. The building stopped creaking. Outside, the headlights went dark. I hadn't realized they were on, but now they were gone, and the front wall was black again, no light pressing through the shutter gaps. I sat at the table for a long time, maybe an hour. The room stayed silent. The floor stayed still. I checked the vent grate. Nothing moved below. I checked the door. It was straight again, not bowed. The latch held. At 3:30, I lay down on the cot. I didn't sleep. I watched the window turn from black to gray. At 6:42, the sun came up. I got up, put on my parka, grabbed the logbook and the keys, and went outside. The air was cold and sharp. My truck started on the second try. I drove south. The road was clear, just like Bodie said. I passed the yellow plow pulled off near a turnout, empty. I kept going. The highway opened up after the junction, and I followed the signs to park headquarters. It was a low brown building with a green roof, same as the gatehouse. 2 trucks in the lot, one of them Becky's white Park Service rig. I parked beside it and went in. Becky was at a desk near the back, looking at a computer screen. She glanced up when I walked in. Her expression didn't change. "Harris," she said. I set the logbook on her desk. "I'm done." She looked at the logbook, then at me. "What happened?" I told her. The headlights with no tracks, the scraping, the radio turning on by itself, Kelsey's voice coming through. The footprints that started in the middle of the road and ended at the window. I told her I wrote Becky's name in the logbook, and everything got worse. The door bowing, the shutter bolts popping, the climbing sounds under the floor. Becky listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened the logbook and flipped to January 8th. The page was torn out, ragged edge still in the binding. "You burned it," she said. "Yeah," she nodded once. "Good." "That's it?" I said. "Good?" Becky closed the logbook. "The gatehouse has a problem. Has for a long time. We don't know what it is. We just know it responds to written invitations. Names, specifically. The rules are the only thing that kept it manageable." Manageable. "Controllable," she said. "Barely." I stared at her. "You knew." "I gave you the rules," Becky said. "I told you to read them before dark. You didn't say what would happen if I didn't follow them." "No," she said. "I didn't." She opened a drawer, pulled out a form, and slid it across the desk. Resignation paperwork, already filled out except for the signature line. "Sign," she said. I signed. Becky took the form, filed it, and picked up her radio. She switched to Channel 6 and said, "Maintenance, this is Silva. I need Gatehouse 3 sealed, plywood and concrete, today." A voice crackled back, "Copy." She set the radio down and looked at me. "You're clear to go." I stood there for a second. "That's it?" "That's it." I left, got in my truck, drove back through Klamath Falls, crossed into Oregon, kept going. I didn't stop until Boise. I found a new job 2 weeks later. Apartment maintenance, indoor work, regular hours, people around. I didn't take another isolated posting. Didn't even look. Because I treated the rules like a dare. I wrote a name to prove I wasn't scared. And I almost opened the door for something that wouldn't stop at the chain.